We're going to continue the Pew Research study, and one of the things that I want to bring up is thinking about income and wealth over a lifetime. One of the myths that you'll see in the media when it comes to the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer is they don't discuss the background of the individuals, right? When we talk about the rich are getting richer compared to what, right? Anytime you see richer or poorer, or this person is richer than that person, you're talking about comparatives. So we are saying compared to who? Who are we comparing this individual to? Okay. In other words, people aren't becoming just richer overall. We're looking at compared to maybe a former time, maybe a group of people, maybe this income group is becoming richer than that income group. Okay. But when we talk about the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the middle class is shrinking, all these statements, we need to think about income and wealth over a lifetime. Now, you may remember in part one, one of the things that we looked at was that age has a significant impact on wealth. In fact, people who generally are wealthier are older. Okay, well, that's hardly wealth inequality. That's usually people who are older have more experience, they've worked more years, they've had more of a lifetime to accumulate wealth. Well, now we're going to look at how work factors into wealth and income, and we're going to look at this over the course of a lifetime. Now, in this example, I'm going to use 4 scenarios, and I'm going to use it over the course of a decade, and then of course we're going to extrapolate from that over a lifetime. But I'm going to use 4 individuals: Jane, John, Jessica, and Bob. And we're going to look at what happens from the age of 20 to the age of 30 with these 4 individuals. So each of these individuals has a job. Okay, and let's say hypothetically that they're in their 20s, they're starting out their career, they're only making $30,000 a year at their job. But what's interesting here is what they're going to do in addition to their job. Okay, and we're going to look at this and look at the results over this course of a decade, and then of course we can obviously extrapolate what would happen over their lifetime. I'm also going to use the example of writing books. But I want you to keep in mind that if you develop technology, for instance, that solves, let's say, water problems, or you develop technology that solves a problem that all humans face, you'll get even more disproportionate results. Okay? So a book is just a tangible, easy example, but it's not that a book is going to be the best thing for someone to get out of being poor. In fact, it probably will be something else like technology. So in the case of Jane, throughout her 20s, she does nothing. She just works her job. And at 30, she has $0 extra. So she does nothing else than her job throughout her 20s. And at 30, she's at $0. Okay? In other words, she's made her $30,000 a year, nothing extra. Okay? And that's the result, right? So if Jane were to complain at 30, well, I don't really have that much money, we would say, well, but what have you been doing the last decade? Okay? John writes 1 book a year in his 20s and makes $3,000 a year per book every year. So at 30, John has 10 books total, and he's earning $30,000 a year. He has accumulated $165,000 through his 20s. Now, if you've watched the previous video in part 1, we know that the average 35-year-old in America only has $10,000 in wealth. So we know John is already way ahead of that. What about Jessica? Well, Jessica writes 3 books a year in her 20s and makes $3,000 a year per book every year. So at 30, Jessica ends up with 30 books, and she's earning $90,000 a year. So she's earning more money than her day job, just like John he's earning the same amount as his day job. She's earning 3 times as much. And she's accumulated $495,000 through her 20s. So she's almost accumulated $500,000 in her 20s just in her extra work. Okay? Finally, we get to Bob. Bob writes 1 book at 20, initially selling $3,000. But he starts to learn sales and marketing, which double his earnings every year from his book. And at 30, he has 1 book earning $1.5 million a year, and he will have accumulated $3,069,000 through his 20s. Bob is a perfect example of what somebody who solves a major problem gets in terms of disproportionate rewards. For instance, Michael Dell is a good example. Computers used to cost several $1,000s. Michael Dell ultimately made computers affordable to several hundred. Okay, and look at what happened. Look at those results for Michael Dell. This is the person who gets disproportional results because they usually solve a disproportionately difficult problem. More than likely, the one book is not going to do it. In other words, this person is going to be creating technology. But you can see in these 4 scenarios what happens with these individuals. And where do you think Bob will be? He will be rich, right? Where do you think Jessica will be? Jessica will be upper middle class. Where do you think John will be? John will be middle class. And where do you think Jane will be? Well, she's going to be lower middle class. Now, just think about this. This is wealth and income over a decade. What is this going to look like in 40 years? If Jane continues to do nothing, if John continues to write 1 book a year, if Jessica continues to write 3 books a year, and if Bob continues doubling his sales. Actually, even if John and Jessica and Bob do not write any more books, if they continue to sell the books that they have, he'll be earning $30,000 a year, she'll be earning $90,000 a year, and of course he'll be doubling his sales every year. So, my point here is that when we look at the media, and we look at a story in the media, we are only seeing the present condition. We're only looking at this second box, right? We're seeing this, we're seeing this, we're seeing this, and we're seeing this. We're seeing what they are at 30. What we're not seeing is what was going on in that previous decade or in those previous years. We see the results of what people get, that is true, but we don't always see what went into getting those results. So that's something to think about, because this Pew study, when it talks about the upper income have 6.6 times the wealth as the lower income, it's not telling us a lot of things, like what their age is, what's the median age of these groups, but it's also not telling us, well, what exactly is the upper income doing that's generating more wealth than the lower income? I mean, are their actions the same? And in part 4, I will get into some of the problems with media, with journalism in general when it comes to wealth inequality, and I will get into some of the problems as well when it comes to a lot of these studies and research methods.